Noting the time and the presence of a quorum, I call this meeting of the Acton Finance Committee to order. The first item on our agenda tonight is public participation. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak at this time? So please. Okay, can you turn the mic on for a second and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Corinne Hogseth. I live in Indian Village.
Okay.
And I am here because I'm concerned about the school budget and what this department's or what this committee's recommendation is going to be. It sounds like you've decided to support it. I don't know if there's going to be any changes tonight. I quickly printed off my tax bills for the last, because I do keep track of this stuff because I'm a spreadsheet junkie. And my average tax bill has gone up 5% per year for the last 10 years, twice the 2.5. And I understand how it works. It's not all exactly 2.5 every year. 2 of those years, it was 11%. And I think, so when was the last time this town passed an operating override? It's been a long time.
It's been about 10 years.
Okay.
A little more than 10 years.
About 2005, 2006.
Okay, so yeah, so like if I had an 11% increase in 2013 and another 11% increase in 2016, and that's in the absence of overrides. This school budget that they're proposing right now, I think, again, you folks have acknowledged it's not sustainable. They're using one-time funds to pay for ongoing operations such as all-day kindergarten, and eventually that, they're not going to have any tuition coming for that, and they're going to, they'll have created what is basically an entitlement program for dual-income families, free daycare, and meanwhile, there's no way to pay for it. They're going to be using reserves right now to do that. They are running us head on into an override. And this is, 2 years after the last override, the debt override, right, for the schools, in which, my taxes went up 8% that year. I know everybody else's went up about the same. There's no way we escape an override or else severe cuts next if they don't, if they go forward with this budget, with their proposals, there's no avoiding that. And now they're also greasing the skids for some major improvements or major updates to the Conant School, which is going to require yet another debt override. That would be like 3 overrides in 5 years. And they've demonstrated no capacity for actually making hard choices and deciding really what's most important. The other thing is when they're doing this all-day K, they're implementing this. At the same time, they're proposing getting rid of assistants in the classrooms at a time when there has never been greater need. I mean, I'm hearing from friends who have kids in the schools, from teachers who work in the schools, that they're having a hard time keeping assistants. The high school, there are no rules down there. It's lawless. And that's a different thing from the assistants, right? They don't have classroom assistants. Maybe they need more. I just feel like the budget that they've proposed is out of step with the priorities of the community. They've always screamed for more classroom assistants, not fewer. And going for all-day K at the expense of classroom assistants, I think, is not going to be received well by the town. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Hi, Nijan Datar, Wincliffe Drive. I'm concerned about the Finance Committee rubber stamping the budget proposed by the School Committee. Given that this budget borrows excessively from free cash for operating expenses, that has to be flagged by this committee as something to avoid. Otherwise, we are heading for an expensive Prop 2.5 override in the next year or 2 years at most. Given the high inflation and the upcoming negotiations with the various unions next year, the tax burden is going to be very harsh if an override is placed on top of that. It is my understanding that the schools have hidden the true cost of the mascot name change by not placing that line item in its own category, but by distributing it under various headings. According to people from other towns, the cost of the mascot name change will be fairly large, and along with their proposal for all-day kindergarten, that may be the main reason for the expensive budget request. The strange thing is that enrollment continues its steady decline, but the budget increase is very high. Keep in mind that many people vote for the town and school budgets solely based on the Finance Committee's recommendation, because they don't have the time to go through it themselves. They trust you to have done the due diligence when making the recommendation. It is disheartening when members of various committees say the right things, but when it comes time to vote, do the opposite thing. We privately lose trust in them. We are in for difficult financial times for the foreseeable future. If you seriously think the school committee has produced a budget that is good for the town, I would like to hear how. Even in the unfortunate event that a majority recommends the school budget at town meeting, I hope you will also announce how many dissenting votes there were and the reasons for the dissent. I have been sorely disappointed by the Select Board and the school committee this past year. Their incompetence and divisive methods have been appalling. I am hoping the Finance Committee will be the one committee with enough integrity to reach the right decision and also give reasons for their decision. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Charlie Cudlick. I didn't get a chance to go to the ALG meeting Friday, but I've watched the video. There is one. And there are some comments that were made which I think are worth talking about, mostly about the fact that there's always a couple of $1 million of deficit when you start discussing a budget, and somehow it all works out. And that's been largely true. Steve Barrett looks through loose change in his couch and comes up with the money, right? He's not listening. But as actually you wrote, whoever wrote the FinCom message in the warrant, which I started reading today, this is a different year. Inflation, negotiating with unions, a war in Europe, first time in 72 years. Next year is going to be much harder than this year. There's some more frequent discussion of overrides. Think about it. The override would be voted next March if the Select Board chooses to put it on the town meeting ballot, or to schedule a separate vote, which I doubt would happen. Let's suppose the override does not pass. That means the school committee would have to make the necessary adjustments between end of March, which is the time of the election, and if town meeting is again in mid-May, as it's going to be this year, it's not much time. It would be traumatic, to say the least, affect the whole town, as would an override if it passes. I've already mentioned it before, but I'll repeat it. An override enough to pay for the yearly increases, as there's a history of school assessments increasing. I ran some of the numbers, I'll let you know later. It would take at least $5 million, perhaps $10 million override, which would be an increase in the single-family tax bill of an additional $1,400 from then on. If anybody thinks that's going to pass, I don't. So the sooner we do something about the problem, which means this year, the better off everybody will be. Because an override, of course, affects the whole town, not just school parents, students, and so on. I know you already voted your recommendations, but you can change them. I think the school assessment warrants a second look. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is the Minuteman Presentation. Dr. Bukalan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to be with you here. I'm talking with the Finance Committee about the Minuteman budget for FY23 and the assessment for Acton in that budget. Overall, our budget's up about almost 5%, including debt and capital, but our assessments to our member towns are up a significant 15%, and I hope to tell the story of why that is. Our FY23 budget objectives, obviously, to continue to protect the health and safety of kids and staff, continue to deliver high-quality career and vocational technical education, support our academy model, increase the enrollment capacity of the facility without increasing the debt load. Our athletic field operations, our new athletic fields are open, and we're beginning to realize some interest from the community groups around rental revenue. And we hope in FY23, well, let's not hope, let's plan on the MSBA project closing out 14 years after we submitted our statement of interest. The budget drivers for this budget, teacher's contract, we're in the third year of a 3-year contract. Health insurance, we're part of a health trust. We don't have our final increases, but we planned on a 10% increase. Hopefully it will not be that. And other increases that are driven by supply chain inflation issues, our CTE supply material costs are planned to go up. Our OPEB, we're beginning to fund OPEB more aggressively. I'll have a slide on that. Replacing 2 worksite buses, and our capital stabilization fund continuing to contribute to that. The story of our budget and of Minuteman this coming year is really our enrollment has shifted. Over decades, the overall enrollment of Minuteman from out-of-district students has been significant. At some points in the 90s, more than 50% of the kids who were attending Minuteman were outside of the 16 member towns. We now have 9 member towns, and we're seeing an increased enrollment, which means that out-of-district enrollment is decreasing. Therefore, the revenue from that out-of-district enrollment in the form of tuition and capital fees is decreasing, resulting in increased assessments to member towns. We're projecting over 700 students in the fall. I'll remind folks that the building enrollment design was 628. We opened in September of 2019 with 620 students. And the pandemic, we closed the doors in March of 2020, and finally we're back in there this fall. But you can see the trend is continuing, and I don't see it changing. Over the last 5 years, you can see the number of applications from our member towns has increased significantly. Out-of-district applications still continue, but we can't even consider those students for enrollment at this point in time. So we've had over 100% increase from just the 9 member towns since FY19. The next slide's got a lot going on, but it kind of tells the story. The blue line across the top shows the millions of dollars we've had available every year to reduce member town assessments. And you see the trend of that line. The line on the bottom is the millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars we've had available from capital fee charges to non-member towns. So we can see it is the story. We've done what we've been asked to do in terms of filling the school with member town students. So we're going to be largely a district supported by its member towns. This slide, we have a 4-year rolling average in our regional agreement to try to offset spikes and dips in year-over-year enrollment. And you can see in this slide, we tried to track enrollment with the increase in assessment. Bolton, which had a 60% increase in students, had a 35%, I say only a 35%, which is not a word you use, only in front of 35% increase, but Bolton did pass our budget unanimously last night. This is a look at what we've experienced this past admission cycle. Admission applications for next fall were due February 15th. We have a cap of about 175 on the freshman class at this time because we simply don't have the staff to accommodate all the students that are seeking enrollment. We offered admission to 227 member district applicants. At this point, 178 have accepted, and we have 45 students on the wait list from our 9-member towns to get into Minuteman next year. Yeah, we have a wait list to get into Minuteman. Acton enrollment has almost, well, it's more than doubled in the last 3 years. We're projecting 90 students next year based upon the offers of admission we made to the freshmen and the outgoing superintendents. That's me. The outgoing seniors. Maybe I'm more senior than I think. But so if you took the preliminary assessment, we called it preliminary because we still don't have a state budget. The total assessment is $2.8 million. $520,000 of that is excluded debt for the MSBA project. And you can see the components of the assessment for Acton. When you look at a year-over-year comparison of the Acton assessment, you'll see that enrollment went up 32%. The assessment went up about 30%. The largest increase was from the minimum required local contribution, which is an amount set by the state based upon enrollment and ability to pay. A little bit more detail on the elements of the budget in our career tech ed programs. Our animal science and logistics engineering programs have begun. We're continuing to support those. CTE shop material and equipment increases I already mentioned. Workplace and lab clothing and safety gear for all students. And we're shifting the costs of credentialing from grants and from students into the district budget. I'm calling out some of these student credentials because they are industry recognized national credentials, and they are part of the achievements of our students as they go through their programming and graduate. We've had some staffing additions really to accommodate changes in enrollment, support professionals, adjustment counselors, and school psychologists. A web and programming teacher, we only had one teacher there for the last few years, and some other aides and support specialists. We've had some reductions, not actual active layoffs, but we're simply not filling some positions that have become vacant. So at this point in time, our net increase in FTEs is 1.5. I say at this time, and I asterisk it, because I'm trying to find additional funding next year to add a couple of academic teachers so that we could accommodate students on the wait list and be able to take them off of the wait list and invite them into the freshman class. So how are we going to get to that enrollment number of 800 without increasing debt? Two major strategies. One is our capital stabilization fund account, which is well funded in large part due to the fact that we were successful in getting equipment grants through the state capital skills program, which was expanded in the last 6 years or so. So money we had been setting aside for equipment for the new building, we didn't have to use for that purpose. We were able to use it for other things. And there are two projects that we have going now. One is an expansion of the building on the north side to expand the size of the metal fabrication shop. We're using capital stabilization funds to do that. That'll increase our capacity by 32 students over 4 years. The second strategy is leveraging our business partnerships and leasing. In 2018, we had special legislation passed for Minuteman that allows us to enter into long-term ground leases. We're working through an RFI process with a veterinary clinic that has 3 clinics now. They're expanding 3 more, and one of them will be on the Minuteman campus. So we're in the design phase of that now, opening in the fall of 2023. That will increase our capacity by at least 60 students, if not more, over a 4-year period of time. Our OPEB estimated liability as of last June, or this June coming, is about $26 million. We have a trust fund balance. We've been pretty I would say, passive in our contributions to OPEB, but the school committee had an OPEB task force, and they came up with several recommendations in terms of increasing the contributions to OPEB significantly over the next 5 fiscal years. We have an ESCO lease that's coming off the books in FY25, and those funds will be diverted towards our OPEB funding liability. In addition, it's not on here, I should put it on here. Any new positions that's created, we're going to budget an additional $10,000 a year to add to our OPEB trust fund for each of those new positions. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions? Christy?
Back to the slide where you had the enrollment for the various towns, the number of applications, et cetera. It says that there's a number of slots per town. Is that based on, what is that based on?
We basically use the same calculation that we use in the regional agreement for capital share and apply it towards applications. So it looks at enrollment over the last few years and your percentage of enrollment over the last few years. So it'll change, the slot allocations will change year to year.
And these are effectively guaranteed slots?
Yes.
So no matter how many kids applied from Acton, 18 kids are getting in?
Yes, you can see this year we had 33 applications from Acton. Because other towns were above or below their slot allocation, after the second round, we were able to offer more Acton students enrollment. We offered 30 students enrollment out of 33, and 22 accepted that offer. 8 said no, and 3 were waiting, hoping to be able to offer them admission if we're able to expand capacity by adding that extra staff I was talking about earlier.
And how frequently does how frequently do the number of slots change? Is that annual? I'm thinking in terms of being able to predict.
Annually.
Annually. All right, thank you.
Mike?
Hi, Dr. Bukwon. Terrific career you've had with Minuteman. And
Thank
you. I mean, I think we're all very proud of you and the school. Just a question about the district now. It went from 16 to 9. I know there are towns that have considered joining a district that are not in it now, like maybe Watertown. Would there even be room for, if they were successful in joining, how could they accommodate the kids in Watertown or whatever town would happen to join that district? Would there be room at the end for them?
Well, the first part of your question was, could they join? Yes, they can join. There's a process outlined in the regional agreement, which is initiated by the town seeking enrollment. Although over the years, we have had many, many meetings in Watertown when the situation was a little different, asking them if they were interested in joining. And they have formed a recent subgroup or task force looking at their career and technical education options, and one of their options that they're looking at is petitioning to join Minuteman. We've also had some interest from former member towns that are non-member towns. The school committee would have to unanimously approve a petition as a first step, and then it takes a year, sometimes a year and a half, depending on the timing of town meeting, because the petitioning town would have to have a vote of their town meeting or city councilors, and then the process would move forward from there. They would also have to contribute a capital share prior to being accepted. So it takes a long time, and the bottom line is that it will take away slots from all the existing member towns. It would also spread the cost out amongst more member towns, so the per pupil assessments would go down. So I anticipate that the Minuteman School Committee will sometime over the next couple of years be dealing with petitions from non-member towns to join.
Thank you.
Jason?
Thank you very much. Yes, this has got to feel good to have this be something that you get taken care of before you retire. So definitely congratulations on having the new school. And even though it took 14 years to SBA to finish, start to finish, I'm sure you're quite happy to have this behind you. And congratulations for having it done. I do have a question though about the cost per pupil. If I'm reading this right, at $29 million for 700 students. My calculation is that this is about $41,400 per student. Does that sound about right to you?
If you include all the capital costs, yes.
It's what's getting charged, so yes, I include all the costs. So my question is, how does that compare to the previous years? Because we've had multiple years of capital expense at this point. So when can we expect a leveling off of the per pupil cost?
Well, our debt hits its peak over the next couple of years. I think it might be in FY24 it begins to go down. It levels off and then it begins to go down in FY25. We still haven't borrowed everything. We have another couple $1 million to borrow.
How is that possible? I'm sorry, how is it possible that you still have more debt
Because
to
the
borrow?
MSBA process has not closed the project yet.
Another question I have, if you take the fiscal year 2020 number, and I'm talking specifically the assessment to Acton, it doubles between fiscal year 2020 and fiscal year 2023. And then it goes up by the same percentage between fiscal 23 and fiscal year 25. So that is a 200% growth in 5 years. According to the latest ALG spreadsheet, you are predicting a 30% increase in fiscal year 24, an 18% increase in fiscal year 25, and then leveling down to 9% in fiscal year 26. While it is true that Minuteman is the smallest of the three largest asks, those are eye-popping numbers. 200% growth in 5 years is very hard to swallow. So again, I ask, how are you going to be able to slow down the per pupil cost and the extremely high year-over-year growth? At this point, you will have gone from 1.5% of our total spend to 6% of our total spend in 5 years. How can anybody plan for that? I mean, this is a lot. So I'm asking, how are we going to bend this curve? And can we do it any faster?
Well, the curve is created by the fact that the non-member enrollment is plummeting. And the revenue from that non-member enrollment coincides with that decrease. And there is a corresponding increase that now has to be shared by the remaining member towns.
So that goes back to my request for the per pupil cost over the last couple of years, because that is independent of where it comes from out of the district.
No, it's not. It's not. It is the per pupil cost. If you're looking at the Department of Education per pupil costs, it does not include capital, and it includes our member district towns only. The per pupil costs, so the revenue and stuff that's created for our assessment formulas are not included in how the Department of Ed calculates per pupil costs. If you look at Acton's per pupil assessment, it's gone down from about $31,000 a few years ago to next year it's going to be somewhere around $26,000 per pupil.
If it's 90 pupils at 2.8 million assessment, that's 31,570.
Well, I'm trying to compare apples to apples. So the way that the Department of Ed calculates per pupil costs does not include capital.
That's fine, but we still have to pay the assessment, which includes the capital assessment, right?
No, I understand that.
So,
And I'm trying to explain as best I can that our revenue stream from non-member towns is going to be zero in FY25, most likely. That is represented between 20 and 35% of our revenue stream over the Some years, much more than that.
Understood, but you've gone from 1.5% to 6% in 5 years. It's a lot.
That's correct, yep.
Steve?
So, I think I was on this committee when you were new. And for the perspective of some of the other members, I may be wrong because I'm seldom wrong. But I believe I made a comment about that you were taking over a declining institution and that we'd be better off closing it down and selling the valuable piece of real estate that you occupy and splitting it up among the 16 member communities at the time.
I recall that conversation.
May not have been me, it might have been Doug Tyndall. But anyway, I never once believed that you could have pulled this turnaround off. And I'm happy you're going to retire. I'm retired. But I will miss you because I've
Thank
seldom seen anybody in public sector turn what was a completely failing operation around to the point where it is now, if anything, oversubscribed. The only thing I'd say is hindsight's 20/20, and I guess we should have built the bigger school.
Thank you, I appreciate those comments.
Anyone else? Okay, so I guess I will just finish with a couple questions. One, in your presentation, you said that student credentialing costs were coming from grants and now they're in the operating budget. Did we lose access to those grants? Is there a reason we're not pursuing them anymore?
Well, the grants that we had taken them from, mainly our federal Perkins grants, we're directing that more towards equipment and the capacity building. The other reason is that, I guess philosophically, at Minuteman, we have a no-cut, no-fee policy when it comes to athletics.
Yep.
When it comes to student participation, we feel that it's an equity issue, that all students have equal access to all the credentials regardless of what they cost. So in the end, the decision to move them off of grants was more to provide equal access.
Okay. Okay. So, I mean, you were here for the concerns from our citizens. We as a committee are concerned about inflation and about, elevated costs, the elevated costs of healthcare, the elevated costs of goods and gas, and the impacts of the war. And we are concerned at where we are in relation to our maximum levy limit, and we're concerned about our future budgets. So I guess I would just take this opportunity to ask that maybe you all do everything in your power to, it doesn't always have to be the best of everything all the time. We've got a shiny new building with a lot of resources for these kids, which is great. I hope we stop expanding at this point so that we can give member communities a break on the budget increases. We don't want our school district to have a 5% increase. So if Minuteman could not have more 5% increases, anything you can do to mitigate costs and spending.
Yeah, if I could just make a comment there, if you looked at our operating budget increases over the last 15 years, they average less than 2.5%. The school is full. Mm-hmm. There's not going to be any opportunity to expand. And the paradigm shift of going from a district that for 50 years had a significant number of students from non-member towns, that's ended. Mm-hmm. So stabilization is somewhat of the key word going forward from a fiscal point of view.
Okay.
And I'll expect you to hold the new superintendent's feet to the fire as you have held mine for many years.
Don't worry. We will. All right. And any further questions? No? Thank you. Oh, Jason, quickly.
Yeah, very quickly. You said that the teacher salary is going up 2%. Is that the start of a 3-year CBA?
It's the end of a 3-year contract.
End of a 3, so next year is a new,
They'll be negotiating, opening up negotiations next year.
thank you.
Thank you so much for this evening and for
Thank you.
all of your work and for the amazing school. Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night. I turned my mic off. The next item on our agenda is our unfinished town meeting warrant articles. We do have a presentation by Tara, but I know she's working 2 meetings, so see if she pops her head back in the door. And for now, Steve wanted to talk about the collective bargaining agreement warrants.
All right, we have some breaking news on 2 of them, the 2 smaller ones, the dispatch and the police superior officers union. The dispatch, it has been agreed that, and this covers the current year 22, 23, and 24. The cost of living increases are 2%, 2%, and 2%. The first year funding is approximately 12,000. They're still working the numbers as we talk, but there's about 8 or 9 members, I think, is what we're talking about. There have been some changes in the salary grid. They've eliminated a couple of lower steps, mostly because they weren't able to hire anybody at those steps anyway, so they've squeezed the grid a bit. So, and that's Article 23. So, based on that information, I think 2% on cost of living is as good as we're going to see. I would make a motion that we recommend Article 23.
Do we want to wait for the actual numbers?
Mr. Barrett's been calculating as best he can. I don't want to pin him down. We can, if it's substantially different, we can revote it before town meeting.
Okay, any further comment? Yes, Christy.
In your experience with this, Steve, how often does the cost of living adjustment map to inflation? I'm surprised that they would agree to something right now with a 2% COLA for 24.
It doesn't really map that well. The history would tend to say that they get their 2% whether there's inflation or not. Would I be happy if the teachers agree to this? Yes, I would be.
I'm just surprised that they're not saying higher because of inflation.
According to the town manager, the point was made that, yeah, you also got your 2% when inflation was 0.
Roland?
So what happens, this goes, it passes, I'm sure it will. What happens with this contract? I mean, because then they would then not be employees of the town of Acton, they'd be part of the district. And then do we have to go back to negotiation of a new salary? Or a new contract?
No, the town manager said that the consolidation, combination of the dispatch function was part of the language in the agreement, so this will carry through to the new district organization as well.
For those Acton employees?
I don't think there's going to be a separate set of salary for the other employees. I think they're going to become employees of the district, and this is the salary grid that's going to apply.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Excellent.
Okay, and Article 26 is the Police Superior Officers Union, which covers the lieutenants and sergeants. Again, it's about 8 members.
What article number is that?
26, the last time I looked. The period covered is FY 23, 24, and 25. The cost of living adjustments are for the first half of 23, 2%, for the second half, 3%, and then for fiscals 24 and 25, 2.5%. Again, some of the lower steps have been eliminated, partly because they've had issues getting people to move up into the leadership positions because the patrols officers could make more money doing details and overtime and have less responsibilities. So the grid is going to be a little bit higher. They've also had some contract language changes affecting how overtime is shared among the superior officers and how the night shift differential occurs. The first year impact is estimated at $28,000.
Okay.
So once again, I would move that we recommend Article 26.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Excellent.
Thank you.
What are the 2 we have left?
The big ones, fire and patrol.
Fire.
Okay.
Article 27. Wait,
Committee lots.
wrong.
No.
Hang on.
We have Tara's article.
24 and 25. 25 is police patrol officers, and then Article 54.
That's Tara.
Okay. Do you want to, could you go see? Thank you.
Land tree clearing limit bylaw.
Please.
Steve, do you know if the police department now is fully staffed? Do you have any openings?
I don't know. I'll defer to the other Steve. He may know.
Hey, Mike. I believe there's still, we've had some vacancies, so I still think there might be one open down there, but that's, not bad out of 42, I think, so.
And they're not in the civil service anymore, correct?
One second, Tara. Roland, would you just let me into the Zoom meeting so I can share my screen? I'm going to put your presentation up for you, Tara. Oh, would you? Yeah. Yeah, I got it.
Next slide.
Share. Okay.
And people have given me feedback that the presentation kind of jumps around, so if you could give me specific suggestions, that would be great.
Okay.
So thank you for letting me speak. Yes. Sorry.
Go ahead, Tara. Thank you.
Okay. State law allows town meeting to enact limits on land and/or tree clearing. In bringing such bylaws forward, the Select Board should consider impacts to equity, climate, and water protection. Next slide, please. Why is tree and land clearing important? Tree and land clearing can be devastating to the environment and to our neighbors. Trees protect our air by both storing carbon and generating oxygen, protect our water by helping to recharge aquifers, filter toxins, and reduce runoff into rivers. And trees, as we now know, contribute to mental health. Next slide, please. There's a concern that there is too much clear cutting. Our petition seeks to ask the Select Board whether to do something about it or not. Here is a picture, next slide, taken a few days ago at 5 Fletcher Court, and is the type of clear cutting we seek to prevent. With land and/or tree killing limits, the damage would have been much less. Next slide, please. If passed, this article would call for the Select Board to help prepare a warrant article, which, if passed, would enact tree or land clearing limits in Acton. So this is a non-binding article to ask them to bring back an article later. So this isn't about tree clearing limits right now, it's about whether we want to engage in the effort to bring something to, like at the DRB meeting, they were discussing, well, we want this in it, and we want that in it, and we don't want to do this, and we're like, well, that's not the topic here. This is just whether to talk about that officially. All right, next slide, please. Green Acton has, oops, my new slide. Green Acton has endorsed this article, and it is our understanding they plan to contribute to the work to find consensus on a potential land clearing limits bylaw. But volunteers don't have the professional skill to draft such a warrant article. So we need the help we need Select Board to authorize Town Council, actually we've changed that to staff because the archaeological people use town staff, and then they had Town Council review it, and then modify the language of the draft article until there's enough consensus to bring it to town meeting. Next slide, please. It's easy to understand why limiting land and tree clearing is good for the environment. It's more complicated to understand why it's fiscally prudent. Next slide, please. Trees add value to the community. Limiting unaffordable building helps reduce pressure on the town's budget. It helps protect against negative neighborhood home value impacts, and it helps reduce physical and mental health costs. Just ask the neighbors who live next door to clear-cut land. Next slide, please. There are various ways to do this. One is to place a limit as to the percentage of the land that can be cleared. Another is to create a buffer or a tree yard around the edges of the property where clearing is not allowed. A third is to require a tree-by-tree removal permit for each mature tree. The list goes on. Next slide, please. The first method, perhaps the simplest, is to limit the percentage of land that can be cleared. The developer would choose which part of the land. Next slide, please. Another method, like that enacted in Concord, is to enact a buffer around the property where tree clearing is banned. Next slide, please. There are a long list of methods, seemingly a different one for each town we looked at. Next slide, please. I'll leave you with a partial list of benefits. We could have listed more if we had more time. We encourage you to visit with the group who wants to enact tree and land clearing limits to learn more. Next slide, please, and I urge you to vote yes. To ask the Select Board to help bring land clearing limits to the next town meeting for you to vote on. Just like zoning, it's an impact on property rights of deed, but the benefits might outweigh the negative. And so the Design Review Board just a few minutes ago voted to recommend this article. And they also talked about helping us, so that was exciting.
All right. Does anybody have any questions, Christy?
I believe I've heard of things like this in the town of Wellesley.
Oh, yeah?
Could you please list some of the towns nearby and what sort of limitations they have? I think it would be helpful for people to understand, based in part on the look. I know I drive through like parts of Hudson, and it's so sad because it's house after house after house, and there's no green around it, versus, I mean, Concord has big, beautiful lots and things, but getting it, I think, for people to visualize what they're looking at, where this has been successful, whether it has helped protect property values.
It's hard to find because they tuck it into other regulations. So most of what we know so far is the tree clearing limitations. And personally, I feel like we shouldn't spend a lot of time on that because it's very heavy on enforcement. You got to go tree by tree and how many inches is it? How old is it? All kinds of assessments and stuff. The applicant has to pay for it. The town ends up paying for it. And so I feel like I'm advocating for the percentage thing. That's what Steve Anderson recommended way back when, and I think that's going to be the easiest, most effective. Can you just measure it on the plan?
And how many towns around here have something
None
like
have
that?
done the percentage. I don't know why, but everyone's doing this the tree enforcement, tree yard, measuring the trees. I don't know, maybe it's because it has lots of jobs at town hall. I don't know.
The only difficulty I would see from some of my fellow members on something like this is that it would limit the landowner's ability to use their lot the way they want to. My only concern relative to percentage would be that possibly it would make portions of a lot not usable, because if you have wetlands, the trees aren't there, but then you suddenly can't build there because of where you can take the trees down, and then it can mess up setbacks and things like that. So just having some answers to questions like that. I know this is just about getting the ball rolling.
Yeah, I think that those are the questions we answer as we go through,
Yeah.
because we'll have to take all that feedback and organize something that we bring to town meeting. And so maybe there could be exceptions. Maybe there could be, maybe it's not for people that already have houses, so it's not about preventing a deck or an addition, but preventing, subdivisions and, very large parcels. I don't know. Maybe it could be over a parcel size. But then again, the villages are probably going to want to preserve what tiny little bits of green space they have left.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Thank you so much for your time, Tara.
Thank you. Oh, you were going to vote on whether to recommend?
I imagine we will discuss that.
Okay. I'll stick around in case you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Did we already we didn't make any recommendation on this one yet?
We deferred.
No, we deferred. Okay.
Whose is this?
I honestly don't know. Does anybody have this article that they know of?
I think it was Steve Wall.
It might have been Steve Walsh's. Yeah. Okay. Any discussion or recommendation? Steve?
Yeah, can we ask if the select board's made a recommendation on this?
Deferred last meeting.
Okay.
David, you deferred this. It hasn't come up yet again?
Sorry, I didn't hear the number at the beginning of your discussion, the PCRC articles?
No, sorry. We're talking about the land tree clearing
This is 50,
bylaw.
54?
Yes, we didn't make a decision last time.
Okay. You were waiting for something. Weren't you on this one?
Yeah, we were kind of expecting the planning board to weigh in, and they did kind of weigh in, but,
Okay.
so we'll discuss that on Monday.
Yeah,
Okay.
they didn't vote, planning board didn't vote on it.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm sympathetic to the notion. I've seen what's going on where she had that picture. So for lack of anything else, and I'll move that we recommend Article 54.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yes, I think we have about 1,000 hours worth of discussion on this point, but that will come later when this actually gets some traction.
Okay. Yeah, I think in all, this is a request that we start looking into this. We can decide later if it makes sense beyond that.
I've lived in town a long time. I've seen a lot more of this type of clear-cut construction than 30 years ago. And I'm sure it is economically cheaper to do it, but it does take a lot of the town character away. And the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. So when they're gone, they're pretty much gone. So I don't see the harm in starting the process to look at a bylaw.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I have some questions about percentages, and I'd like to see almost some professional analysis of what would be a reasonable percentage of trees that can be logically removed. And also how this article would impact other sites. For example, one of your energy goals is to have more houses become solar powered. trees are not friends of solar panels, as you know. Like my house has 38 solar panels and no trees. And I think the site looks beautiful. It's right on the corner. But it's just that it may not be ready for prime time. I think you really are onto something, but I just think it needs some more technical analysis and input from planners or arborists or solarists.
I think that's what she's aiming for with this article. Since the mic is still on there, can you just go ahead and?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
So yes, that's certainly what we're going to be doing. That this is just the article to say whether it's worth looking into effectively.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Karen, can you turn off that mic?
Yeah, would you mind?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so the article has been moved and seconded to recommend. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Abstentions? Okay, thank you. Okay, do we have any more open, we're done, good, excellent. We have any committee reports? We have an ALG report in that you all should have received the updated projections that will be printed in the town meeting warrant, and I would like to stress that the numbers in the out-year projection columns are best educated guesses based on continued, budgeting.
Current operations.
Exactly, current operations, and taking into account any economic indicators that they can. And that was done in detail by Minuteman as well. So they are not numbers that we have, obviously agreed to budget to. They are simply forecasting of if we did nothing else. So do we have any comments on that ALG model?
Or any questions?
Or any questions?
I think they're woefully understated. But it's about next year and the year after. Inflation's going to go on for a while. We haven't seen a significant increase in state aid in forever. The state's revenue model is at least inflation protected to some degree. They get most of their money off of income taxes and sales taxes as opposed to property taxes. So I suppose there is some hope that we might see some increases in local aid. I think we're, as the people who spoke in citizens' concerns said, we're heading down the road to an operating override. I don't know exactly what year that will be. As far as this year's concerned, we know this, a lot of people don't. This was the third year of a teacher's contract that had a built-in 5%. So the day we started talking about the budget, we were already out of our property tax increase. The whole 2.5% had been eaten up. So I think this is a problem. I think it's maybe next year's problem, maybe the year after's problem. Charlie's right about the way you strategically go about operating overrides is you don't go with just enough to cover you for 1 year. But the history of overrides in this, operating overrides in this town is mixed. The votes are close, at the ballot box anyway. And we better start planning right after town meeting.
Well, I think my understanding of, us calling, believe it was us that asked for the ALG meeting on an early basis to populate the ALG plan with these projected numbers was so that we would have a figure that we could speak to at this town meeting. Is that right? Is that kind of the idea?
So our town meeting statement and my whatever speech I'm going to give is going to speak to our concerns as we have here in the outward years that we are in trouble budget-wise versus revenue. And as a committee, we agreed that if we put out an ALG model where all the outward years look not so bad, but they don't actually reflect what the likely.
What could really be coming down the pipe.
What could really be coming down the way, right. So it's not necessarily to populate that so that we could call out that number so much
No,
as.
speak to it, though.
Speak to it, sure. Speak to the problem, yes.
Right.
I will aim to do that. So Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question or a concern. It's based on the presentation by the citizens group earlier this evening, that if the Finance Committee would consider either reaffirming their vote on Article 7, just to see if their opinion has changed. I think we have to be careful what our message says by our vote to the citizens of the town of Acton, especially if we're all uncomfortable with this assessment and the way it was put together, the size, and so on. So I'm just asking that one more time we vote, re-vote on this, Article 7. The Acton-Boxborough Regional School District Assessment.
Motions to reconsider usually require somebody from the prevailing side to make that motion. Does anyone at this table wish to make a motion to reconsider Article 7?
No.
Hearing none, I see no reason to reconsider.
Yep, and to that point, to their concerns, I just will say that despite the suggestion that we rubber stamped this budget, it was my experience that the school made deep cuts to staff and that they were difficult cuts and that they did let go of their hope to fully fund all-day pre-K, which is all-day K, which is something that the vast majority of Massachusetts towns already provide. And the citizens spoke to the problem, which is they want to fund all-day K, but they're cutting assistance in the classroom, and actually what we needed this year was to do both and couldn't afford to do otherwise. So there are problems with the operating budgets going forward still, but those were long-term costs. They weren't just one-time costs. When you reduce FTEs, that impacts the budget down the line, and I appreciate that they took that step. So I agree that we have a problem, but we also agreed that that was enough for this year, and I don't see a need to go back and revote that,
We didn't agree unanimously.
No, we don't have to.
Right, but we agreed in ALG because this body agreed in the majority. But I appreciate what you're saying, and I hear what you're saying. Yes, it was not unanimous. Jason.
I would also like to definitely reiterate what you just said. One of the things that was said by the citizens and their concerns was that they wanted the school to make hard choices. The school having 26.5 FTE cuts, while they are not they're not the highest salary personnel in the school district, that is still a significant number of FTEs to be cut. And I believe, Mr. Majors, you were the only one who voted against the school budget, and I believe I was the only one who voted against the town budget. So I'm more than happy to have a line-by-line argument about what's a want and what's a need. But no, unfortunately, at this late stage, the ALG process was completed, I believe, on March 10th. So no, I don't see a reason to adjust either of these things. Do I absolutely think that we have problems in 2 years? Do I think that we're headed to an override in 2 years, barring some other large exogenous income source? Yes, I do. That's why any item over the last couple of years that we as a body have deemed to be a want and not a need looms so very large in the compounded interest problem of year-to-year budgeting.
Adam?
Yeah, I would just add, I know that the two of the members who spoke, at least pre-meeting, aren't here anymore. And while I can certainly see the perception that when we come to a meeting, hold up these town warrants and right off the bat, vote yes on the three largest budgets that it looks like we're rubber stamping it. And so I hope that those citizens and other citizens might watch these meetings and might go back and watch some of our previous meetings to see just how many hours we discuss and how many hours get put into the ALG process, and that it's really not a rubber stamp and that really is a negotiation or a moderation. Specifically, it's a moderation, isn't it? So I just wanted to add that for public forum.
Christy?
I would also like to recommend, I expect that Charlie already does, but that any citizens who come in here requesting changes to the school committee budget very strongly direct those changes towards the school committee. Now, since we've regionalized, we Actonians have less control over exactly what happens with that budget, and I wholeheartedly agree that the school needs to focus more on making the budget affordable for all the citizens who live in the town, but that message needs to go also very directly to the school committee. It is important for us to hear it, but the school committee gets a bunch of parents asking them for things that the parents want for the kids, and they don't end up hearing as much from the broader community. So please speak to the school committee no matter whether you have children or not.
Anyone else? Okay. Any other committee reports? Steve.
Move we adjourn.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you, everybody. I will see you at town meeting. No meeting next Tuesday.